Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hello everybody, Kieran aka the Laird here, and this is a fairly short intro to this episode of the Laird's Lowdown, which I'm not filming on that day, but the day it goes out will actually be my 48th birthday, so happy birthday to me. You have a special episode to celebrate my birthday, whoopee. Yeah, feeling really old. I'm so close to 50 now, it's so depressing. Halfway to death. Yeah. But I feel a lot older as well because my body's so broken, but that's another story altogether. But yes, those of you who obviously follow my channel regularly, been watching me for some time, will remember that back in September last year, I did a similar video to this one, where I looked at the new the new IP list that Atari had released. And this was quite important because this is the first time Atari had really done such a thing where they'd released this really in-depth document that showed all the IP that they owned and also categorized it as well in terms of where that IP came from, whether it was their own IP, whether it was legacy IP from people like Infogrames, or Accolade or whatever. It wasn't completely split down, but some of it was. I don't think Accolade was on that one. I don't quite remember. But basically, it split down the IP and how they owned it. I mean, because they also had taken over Night Dive and Digital Eclipse. So there's some other studios that they'd bought as well. Yeah, and it was very interesting and revealing document because a lot of people weren't quite aware of how much IP Atari owned, especially since they'd sold a lot of it off when they went into bankruptcy proceedings. So they didn't actually go bankrupt, but they went through the proceedings and sold off a load of their IP, which actually helped them rescue themselves. They did sell off some stuff like there was some specific IP they sold off. For example, Battlezone, which they sold to Rebellion, Test Drive, which they sold to I can't remember now. Was it THQ Nordic? I can't remember, but they sold that. They sold Alone in the Dark. I think that might have gone to THQ Nordic. They sold Test Drive, Alone in the Dark, Battlezone. There was lots of other stuff. I'm trying to remember. And they sold off loads of their inherited IP. So, for example, they sold off a lot of the IP they'd inherited from Ocean Software because Infogrames bought Ocean. And I'm going to get people telling me it's Infograms. But yeah, I've always said it Grames, so... but yeah, there was lots of that. They sold off all the Philips Studios IP, including the rights to the CDI and Video Pack / Odyssey 2. They sold all of that off to Paul Andrews. There was Melbourne House IP they sold off as well. Some of that went to Pico Interactive, who also bought a load of the Ocean IP. Basically, a lot of that British, so to speak, IP that they owned from those days of Ocean, Melbourne House, etc., was split between selling. They sold some to Pico Interactive and they sold some to Paul Andrews. And this is important because I'm going to be looping back to this in a moment. But a lot of people were surprised how much they did still own. And then, of course, Atari then started going on an IP acquisition. The first big one that they really bought was in television. Everyone's like, my God, they've bought in television. Yep, so they bought the whole rights to the name. They bought all their back catalogue. So they bought all the rights in television stuff, which was a big deal. And then they surprised people even further by announcing that they'd bought Stern Electronics back catalogue as well, which obviously included Berserk and Frenzy, for example. So really big name games. Then they also announced that they'd had another big IP acquisition, but they were very sketchy on the details. They just said it was another big IP acquisition. I can't remember, they quoted a certain number of titles that was going to be in it, like over 50 titles or something. But no one really knew what it was or where it came from until they started announcing some of that IP. For example, they announced that they had the rights back to Bubsy, and that was a pretty big one because there was obviously the intention to them to make Bubsy their mascot, and just recently they released, or they're just about to release, I think actually, this Bubsy Ultimate Collection, which includes all the Bubsy games, including Bubsy 3D, the Notorious, and the Jaguar game, which is really interesting because that was a Jaguar exclusive. So that's quite cool to see, and yeah, and they've been announcing obviously lots of other bits and pieces, and yeah. And now they have updated that IP list again. And when they announced that they'd bought all that last big load of IP and stuff like Bubsy and some of the other games that they announced, when they did the last IP list, that was around that same time. And I did look at it and speculate that they'd actually bought all the IP back from Pico Interactive that they'd sold to Pico Interactive. The interesting thing was some of that IP was showing on the Atari documents. For example, the Accolade games like Summer Challenge, Winter Challenge. There was I'm trying to think what there was some other Barclay Shut Up and Jam, which they just called Shut Up and Jam. They'd removed the Barclay part. There was some other Accolade stuff. I'm trying to remember what a lot of it was. Trying to shape my brain. But anyway, it doesn't matter too much. But a lot of that IP was still showing on Pico Interactive's website. So they were still showing ownership of a lot of that because they'd re-released some of these games, for example, or done ports. For example, they did the port of Head Over Heels for the Jaguar. Although it wasn't really a port because it was just the ST version made to play on the Jaguar. It was a bit of a lazy job, really, unfortunately. So a lot of that stuff was still showing on Pico's website, but a lot of it was listed on this, but not all of it, strangely, was listed on this Atari IP document. So I did speculate that, and it seems to I've turned out completely correct with that, because now if you look at Pico Interactive's website, all of that has been removed. All of that IP, the Accolade IP, Ocean IP, ex Melbourne House IP, loads of that has been removed now from Pico's website. Their website is really bare bones now. It lists hardly anything. Mainly their re-releases of some Gremlin stuff, which they were just doing under license anyway. They didn't own the IP. They were doing that under license from Urban Scan, who owned Gremlin. And Urban Scan were actually owned by the guy who originally owned Gremlin. So basically, it's all intents and purposes, the original Gremlin basically bought themselves back again in many ways. The original owner of Gremlin just bought all his IP back off Atari, and then he's licensed it out to various people, including Pico and Retro Games Limited, which is why there's loads of Gremlin stuff on their mini consoles, is because Urban Scan licensed it to them as well. But yes, I'm going off on a massive tangent again, and I did say this intro wouldn't be too long. But basically, the new IP list that Atari have released now is better split up in terms of showing what they own and who buy. A lot of those games that were missing on the last one from the Accolade IP that Pico owned and stuff are now showing on the new document. And also there is one very big surprise, which is something that Atari haven't announced at all, which is showing on this IP list. So they have made a new acquisition, which I'm very surprised they've not announced anywhere. Plus a few that they did announce. For example, it shows that the Big Five games that they bought from Big Five Software, Minor 2049, a Bounty Bob, which we kind of knew about, and it shows the new IP that they acquired that they're going to use on the newly launched Infogrames, or say it right, label, because they bought some indie developers and said that they were going to be publishing kind of PC indie games through Infogrames rather than Atari, because it fitted better with the brand, which it does, in my opinion. I think it was a sensible idea to separate Atari and Infogrames. So they've done that, and so that's better shown on this new document. So what I'll do now is I'll flip to my PC and we can have a little look through the document and talk about it. Okay, so here we are. So this is Atari IP List, last updated, and the date always confuses me because it's in American order, 13th of May 2025. So just a few days ago. This is being reported on quite a few websites now, so I'm probably a little bit late in terms of when this video goes out, but I wanted to do it anyway because the last time I looked at this, it went down really well, and I found it very interesting personally. So obviously, as before, it starts off with Atari's own IP. Nothing massively interesting there. It's mostly Atari 2600 and 7800 games, as you'll probably see if you start going down it. But there's also some of the new stuff they've done, like Food Truck Frenzy on there. I was pleased to see Checkered Flag listed on there. There seemed to be that seemed to be missing from a lot of lists for some reason. It's like they didn't seem to know that they owned it. Obviously, iRobot, which they've resurrected recently, is on there. There's lots more of their old arcade games seem to be getting listed on here as well. That probably a lot of people wouldn't know so much about. Stuff like Liberator and Indy 4 and Lunar Battle, Highway, loads of that stuff, Destroyer. There's loads of these old games that a lot of people probably wouldn't know anything about, some of which didn't even come out. And we start to see the first clue, even on this first page, of this other IP that they've acquired, because, like I talked about in the intro, because they haven't separated it. They have put it in with the Atari IP. And I just noticed as well, I'm going to come back to that, but what does the S's mean? I don't see what the S means. Maybe it tells you somewhere what that means, but it just seems strange that that's there. I don't know. But I'm going to point this out now because some of you might have already seen it, but we'll see here a game called Elensar, which those in the know will know is a multi-format homebrew game. And just underneath it you can see Escape 2042, which again, multi-format homebrew game. Both were done by a French publisher called Orion Soft, and they were released for the Jaguar, among other things. I own the Jaguar versions, so I was really fascinated to see those on there. So it seems that Atari have bought the Orion Soft catalogue. It'd be interesting to see what they do with it, because all the Orion Soft games are on here in this list. So I was really, really interested to see those there. What they're going to do with them, I'm not sure. I mean, Yopaz iStar is another one that's listed there as well. So there's lots of these Orion Soft games on this list. You'll notice if you look down. So it'd be very, very interesting to see what they're going to do with those. But the Atari list, apart from that, doesn't really have any real surprises. They just seem to have updated it with more games that they own. I'm guessing as they realised how much stuff they actually do own. I mean, there's even unreleased sort of prototype arcade games on this list and stuff. But some of the new stuff as well, like Mr. Jump and Run, is on there. But we go down. And then it goes into Digital Eclipse. Obviously, they're games that they've done. Interesting that they put Night Stalker and Dark Haven there since they're in television IP, but I'm guessing it's because they're the ones they originally did for the Intellivision Amico, which I think are now being released through Steam instead for the PC. So I'm guessing that's why they're there. The Night Dive stuff, so System Shock is a big one on that part. And then their legacy IP from various publishers, so a few from GT Interactive. Strange not to see Blood there. I mentioned that last time that Blood was missing, and I don't know why, because they re-released Blood on Steam. So why is Blood not there? Because that was a GT Interactive game, so I'm not sure why that's still not on their list. I find that really strange. And then the Infogrames stuff, which I was very pleased to see includes Hostages, which I loved on the Spectrum actually, but it was also on the ST and lots of other platforms. And that includes some of their new stuff that they've acquired, like Totally Reliable, which I mentioned obviously in the intro, the new sort of indie games that they've got, Surgeon Simulator. Then we've got all their Microprose stuff, which obviously is a lot of simulation games, flight sim style stuff, war games, and then Airborne Rangers, an interesting one to see. That was a good one back in the day. Knights of Sky, that was another good one that I remember very, very well. Then there's the Stern Electronics IP that they acquired, including Berserk Friendly, Lost Tomb, probably the biggest names out of those. And then we have Accolade now, so they've listed Accolade. So that includes stuff like Bubsy, Combat Cars, which I loved that on the Mega Drive, it's a great game. Hardball, Mean 18, which is of course released for the Atari 7800. Redline, which I was really interested to see there, because Redline was actually the sequel to Battle Wheels, the Lynx game Battle Wheels, which a lot of people probably won't know, done by Beyond Games, who are actually still going. they changed their name to Smart Bomb Interactive, and then they became Wildworks. They're still going under that name. It makes a lot of very popular kids games, mainly with National Geographic. So they're still going, but obviously they didn't own the IP. Atari, I'm guessing, Accolade, owned the IP for Redline. I'm guessing, not them. They just developed it. But that's really cool. I'd love to see that get re-released. And then we've got Shut Up and Jam, and then Summer Challenge, Winter Challenge, which I mentioned. And as I say, we all knew they were Picos. They were released on the Pico Collections, example for Evercade. So and now they are listed under Atari's Accolade IP. Then we've got the M Network stuff, which is basically the games that Mattel released for the 2600. So they're all there as well. And then we've got Other, which has got some interesting little bits and pieces in it. And that includes Bounty Bob Strikes Back, obviously, and Miner 2049, which they bought from Big Five Software. But other ones to point out in here, which are quite cool. There's a few 7800 homebrews that Bob DiCrescenzo did for Atari Age, like Crazy Bricks and Failsafe, which they are now re-releasing, of course, themselves. So it's cool to see them now listed with the Atari IP. There's also Brain Dead 13, which I was really interested to see. Ready Soft did that, and it was their first sort of original game that they did, because previously they'd done obviously Dragon's Lair and Space Ace conversions, but Brain Dead was a very similar kind of FMV cartoon style game, but it was their original game and concept. It wasn't converted from an arcade game. So it seems that Atari have acquired that, which is interesting, as it's a Jaguar CD game. So maybe that's why they've picked it up. And I'm guessing maybe we might see a re-release of that if it hasn't been announced already by the time this video goes out. Because Songbird have been re-releasing some Jaguar stuff, like they've done a new release of Fight for Life, for example. And they've done a new release of Atari carts as well, because they were late Jaguar games that were only available in a small number, very, very rare. So they've now put out re-releases of those so people can pick them up that couldn't before. So yeah, interesting to see that there. Very interesting indeed for me. That was one of the most interesting things that stood out from here. We've got some Ocean IP, for example. There's Mr. Nuts, which is an Ocean game. Also, I noticed it says Tank Ocean there, which is really interesting, because Tank indeed was a game by Ocean, but it was an arcade conversion. So I don't think they realised that wasn't original IP. Tank was a conversion of the SNK arcade game, so I'm guessing that's owned by SNK. I think that's a mistake there. In fact, Tank, and why they put Ocean is because obviously there's an Atari game called Tank, but they SNK actually renamed it later on TNK, and I was always under the assumption that they did that just because Atari had a game called Tank as well. It was probably their IP, the name. They probably would have trademarked, I don't know. But I'm guessing that's why. And then there's also some at the Melbourne House there, like the art studio was Melbourne House. Head Over Heels was another Ocean one. There was another Melbourne House that I noticed on here. I can't think what it was now. I'm trying to look down the list. But there was another Melbourne House one there, wasn't there? But there's also Warp Speed, which is actually, I'm sure that was an Accolade game, so I think that should be over with Accolade over here. And also, Jerry the Germ Goes Body Popping, which was amazing to see, because if you don't know, and the Americans certainly won't know this, but that was a game by Firebird Software here in the UK. Firebird were acquired by Microprose. Microprose were acquired by Infogrames. So Atari ended up owning all of Firebird's stuff. Or Firebird were actually one of 3 labels that were owned by the British Telecom, who were originally owned by the government. They were in the UK provided all our telephones, basically. British Telecom, name says it all. They were later an independent company, and they had a software label, which they had Rainbird, which is simulation stuff or more serious stuff. Firebird, which did a lot of arcadey stuff, and then Silverbird, which was their budget label. And Jerry the Germ was a Firebird game. They did sell off a lot of that IP to different companies. Like I think Tomo bought a load of it. But it seems there is still some kicking around, because Jerry the Germ is one such game. Interesting to see Awesome Golf there. I'm not sure why that's listed under Other and not listed under Atari IP, because it was a Lynx game published by Atari. So, I mean, it was developed by Handmade Software, but it was Atari's IP essentially. So it seems strange that that's
in other. Also, there was something else I noticed here as well. Oh yes, there, Iron Soldier. Now that was interesting to see because Iron Soldier, Atari published the Iron Soldier game for the Jaguar, the original one, but the game was by Eclipse software, and then Iron Soldier 2 was obviously published by Telegames because it was one of the games that went over to Telegames when Atari pulled out of the Jaguar market, and they made the deal that Telegames would then publish some of the games that they were going to publish, which included Iron Soldier 2. And then Telegames went on to publish Iron Soldier 3 for the PlayStation, and I was always under the PlayStation and Nuon actually. Sorry, I was always under the impression that Telegames would have owned the Iron Soldier IP, if anyone, because of them publishing Iron Soldier 2 and 3. But it seems Atari have either acquired that or they do indeed own it. I'm not sure which. But yeah, interesting to see that on there. So that means that will probably appear on future collections of Jaguar games now. And we'll go down. And then we've got all the Intellivision IP, which includes stuff for the Aquarius, which is interesting to see as well. And then the hardware list. And I actually talked about this a lot when I did the last IP video, and it was a very limited list then. And this seems to have been expanded, and there's lots of interesting things to note here. Like they've listed things like driving controllers and trackballs and joysticks and disk drives on here. Like the XF551, the 1050, their disk drives, of course. The program recorders are on here. And more obscure hardware, like we've got the portfolios on here. The Transputer workstation is on here. Unreleased consoles like the Game Brain and Atari Panther are on here. So they've obviously been trademarked again, and the Cosmos. Very interesting to see all those on there. And I did say before that a lot of people pointed out it didn't say Atari Valcon, and I speculated that was because they'd sold the Atari Valcon to C-Lab, who did the later versions of that computer. And I'm guessing that's still the case because Valcon does not appear on there. So I'm guessing I was right in that they just don't own Valcon, that Atari sold that off to C-Lab when C-Lab continued making the computer after Atari decided to discontinue it. They continued making it for the music market. But yeah, interesting they put XEGS and not the full name XE Game System. But yeah, and actually I just noticed they put 2600 plus, but haven't put 7800 plus. That's a bit strange, isn't it? Very strange indeed. And actually, they've got, it doesn't say Atari XE and Atari XL, which surprises me as well quite a bit actually. I would have expected to see the XL and XE monikers listed on there, given all the other stuff that they've listed in there. So yes, that's the new Atari IP list for May 2025. Lots of interesting things in there, as you've heard me pick out. Lots of new additions, most notably the Orion Soft IP, but also some other little bits and pieces like Iron Soldier, which I noticed, the extensions of the Accolade and Ocean stuff and all that as well. Yeah, lots of interesting things in there. And in terms of what conclusions we can draw from this, you will notice there is a lot of Atari ST games listed there. And of course, there was the revelation that they are indeed planning to do an Atari ST Mini in cooperation with Retro Games Limited, as I revealed in a previous Laird's Lowdown episode. I'll link that down in the comments if you want to know about that and don't know about that. So I think there's lots of stuff on this list that might be appearing on an ST Mini in the future. I think there's lots more Jaguar and Lynx stuff there, so I think we might see some updates to Atari 50, adding some Jaguar Lynx, maybe some more Atari 8-bit stuff as well in there, which would be really, really good. I'd love to see another extension to that. And I think we might see another Evercade collection as well, given some of this stuff. Maybe an Accolade collection for the Evercade. I think that's something that's very possible, given Atari is still working with them, because of course we just got Atari Arcade 2, which has a load of the Stern IP on and some more Atari stuff as well. So I think we will see more collections. I think we will see updates to Atari 50, and I think some of this is going to be used on new mini consoles like an Atari ST Mini as well. But I'd love to know your thoughts, to see if you picked out anything interesting from this list that I didn't. You can, of course, go and download it online quite easily and look for yourself. And I'll be really interested to read your thoughts down in the comments. But I've been the Laird, and as always, I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Bye bye.